Hello everyone, happy Monday. Welcome back to Artbeat Studios and Studio Central's live art demonstrations. Today we are going to engage with some chalk paint and we are going to be looking at hand lettering in a really basic, simple and very manageable way for any beginners. But first I want to tell you a little bit about what Artbeat Studio is and what these live demonstrations are all about. So Artbeat Studio is a peer-led, consumer-guided mental health organization that uses creativity and art as a tool for recovery and healing. One of my favorite things about Artbeat Studio is that the community that is built around artists coming together and kind of navigating mental health and navigating barriers and systems, while also finding joy in discovering skills and talents. It really brings people together and connects people, and I think that community is such a huge piece about what makes Artbeat so special, but also what's a huge piece in mental health for everyone. And that segues really nicely into what we're doing through these art demonstrations. During COVID-19, we have all been, if we're lucky to have a home, we've been isolated for the most part in our homes, and that's been really hard for people. And so what we wanted to do with these online live art demonstrations is we wanted to bring a sense of that community back within a time where we can't actually be face to face and be seeing each other, but we can still communicate online, and we're super fortunate to be living in a time where there's internet. And so every day, Monday to Friday at 3:30, we have a art demonstration, and we're going to be continuing this for the next couple of weeks and foreseeable future, as people are still at home and unable to be gathering in spaces. But when it's safe to do so, we want to invite you, if you don't already attend Studio Central, which is open Tuesday to Friday. It's located at 444 Kennedy on the second floor, and we have art animations, creative technique workshops happening at 1 o'clock every day, I believe. It's been a long time since I attended one, at least 4 or 5 weeks. But we also have a concert or poetic performance or poetry slam at 3:30 every day that the studio is open, and that's a time for people to gather and enjoy other members of the community's talents while enjoying coffee. But overall, it's just a really great space with a great community. So we're really looking forward to, whenever it's safe to do so, to be together. But for now, we're really thankful that people are joining us online here, familiar faces and new faces, and we can continue to be together and to chat as a community online. So with that being said, feel free to comment throughout this video. I have the camera facing me today so I can kind of see what people are writing. So if there's questions, comments, funny jokes, insights, just let me know and I will share with people, as well as you should be able to see it on your screen there too. Okay, so hand lettering is a really fun and beautiful way to share a message that you have for yourself or for the world. I really like reading poetry. It's one of my few introvert hobbies that I have. I'm pretty extroverted, so I don't read a whole ton, but I love reading poetry, especially short poems. Marissa says, "Hi Kristen, happy Monday." Thanks, Marissa. Happy Monday to you too. I'm really happy that the sun was out, but at least it's bright. It's a little cloudy now, but it's bright outside. But back to poetry. I find a lot of joy in reading poetry, finding something that's meaningful to me, and then kind of blowing it up and writing it out in beautiful handwriting or brush script, which is it's the same thing as chalk hand lettering, except for you're using a paintbrush. And if we have time today, we can kind of like look at that a little bit, but it might be a workshop for another time. It's important to always credit whoever you are quoting. People like to do inspirational quotes these days, as well as a lot of people are liking to hand letter poetry, and it's just really important that the person that created that work, that you write their name as well. You make sure that they're being credited for what they're doing and what they've done. So today we are going to be working with a really simple chalk marker. The brand is called Bistro, and I believe that this is from Michael's. So as you can see, that's what it looks like. This chalk marker has a round tip, which is really great for this simple technique that we're going to be doing, which doesn't require like any calligraphy. But in learning this technique, once you want to progress to the next level of, say, doing this with a paintbrush or doing this with a calligraphy pen or calligraphy marker, it can be really helpful to know this basic, it's basically a two-step thing that we're going to be doing today. Christine, hello. How are you doing, Christine? I hope that you're well. I miss seeing your face often, but so happy that you're here. Okay, and I will show you a couple examples. Another thing that I think about hand lettering is that it's quite intimidating, especially when you're just starting out. Today you can see a lot of hand lettering online. A lot of it's done digitally, so there are programs that people can use on their iPads to write things in really lovely fonts. Some people are super talented and actually like create their own fonts through these programs, which is like quite a skill that I will never have. And they can do both like hand lettering in a physical sense and also in a digital sense. So you do see a lot of really beautiful, perfect hand lettering out there, so it can be intimidating to start. But it's also a really great, I find it therapeutic practice and meditative and grounding, and it really it allows you to be focusing on your hands and on steadiness and stillness. It's another introvert hobby, so don't feel worried about being perfect. This is a total learning experience. My hand lettering is far from perfect, and it's come a long way since when I first started doing it about 4 years ago. I can show you some examples. So this is about 3 or 4 years ago, a quote that I wrote, which actually this one doesn't have the artist credited on there. It's actually Helen Keller, I believe, said this, just a quote. And so that's a look that's like quite simple. It's definitely not my first things that I've ever written, but after a time, I was able to, with a paintbrush, write a lot more complicated and detailed. So this is actually a super long, this is a Nayera Waheed poem called The Invitation. And it, as you can see, with the paintbrush, this is quite small lettering, and took a lot of brain power and patience and stress management, I would say, because by the time I got to about here, if I messed it up, that would have been a long time of concentration to lose. So just an example of something from quite a beginner to maybe a little bit of an intermediate with writing. If you haven't read this poem, it's super beautiful. I encourage you. Also encourage you in general to read Nayera Waheed. She's just the most incredible writer. Great. So today we are going to just do a really simple, we're going to do a really simple piece of hand lettering on this chalkboard, which is also from Michael's. I actually bought it for my wedding and hand lettered kind of like the order of the day and the ceremony and stuff like that. And it looked really beautiful, and it was do it yourself and cost me very little. So it's a good skill that you can use a lot of different ways. I'm actually going to start by showing you with a marker kind of the technique that we're going to be doing with the chalk, because it will be a little easier to do our final piece on here if we're not wetting it down and erasing. Christine is great. I'm so happy to hear that. And Marissa says, wow, Kristen, that is remarkable what patience you have. Thank you. Took me a long time to get to that point, and I still struggle with patience a little bit. So it's good to see the product of your patience and then continue on in your work. So hand lettering, super, super simple, 2 steps. But it has one kind of technique that you're going to want to remember, and that is to do with the direction of your letter strokes. What I mean by letter stroke is if I'm doing the letter K, I'm going to be writing line by line that letter. And naturally, and how you were probably taught cursive when you were growing up, if you were lucky to be taught cursive in school, is that there are directions that most people put their pen when they're writing in cursive, which is often ingrained in that learning of writing. So when you are writing in hand lettering, to do kind of like people call it a faux calligraphy, because it's not officially calligraphy, but it is, it can have the appearance afterwards of calligraphy, is when you're doing a downstroke, facing down, you actually are going to create that to be a thicker line. And whenever you're doing an upstroke, that's going to be thinner. That's as simple as it is. That's the whole first step. And then the second step is actually doing the writing. But this is like the main theory that you're going to want in this really simple hand lettering. So, for example, if I'm writing my name, I'm going to do some upstrokes and then some thick downstrokes, which is, it's really nice when you do this, the thicker downstrokes, because it's with gravity, it's really actually nice to write like that, and makes it easy to remember which areas you're making thicker and which you're making thinner. And then you can do fancy little lines. What we're going to be doing in hand lettering with the chalk is actually going back after for a second round to really bring that calligraphy look to the piece. All right. So I'm just going to write a really simple phrase today. I think I'm going to write, remember why you started. I think that's a good one for right now. When things feel wonky and things feel stressful, to ground yourself in remembering like what's the purpose of the things that we're doing, and take those good things and let those good things melt into our days and into our mindsets, so that we can really like be grounded in those things. So we're gonna do that. The first thing that we're gonna do, which if you're doing this at home as well, have a piece of paper, have a pencil, literally any writing tool that you have, marker, paintbrush even, we're going to write in cursive, in really big cursive letters, without trying to do anything fancy first. So that's the first step. With a chalk pen, you're gonna wanna really like shake it up. You wanna even dab a little bit at a piece of paper first, because sometimes they can be, it can be slow to have all of the chalk paint come into the nib of the pen here. Okay, I'll actually pull you up a little bit so you can see a little closer. There's a lot of different ways to decorate your chalkboard, or if you're working on canvas or if you're working on paper. I usually like to do some kind of like leaves or grains, as you know if you've watched other art demonstrations. So I like to leave a little bit of a border around my words so that I can fit in some of those nice kind of decorative elements at the end. But as I said before, we're gonna start by just writing in regular cursive, nothing fancy, but I'm not gonna write it super tightly. I'm gonna leave some room so that we can go back in and then fancy it up. One thing that I forgot to say that's really important is visualizing your word on your page. I have also had very, very true misfortunes where I've spent a long time creating a wreath like we did the other day, and then I kind of just started writing and didn't think about where my words needed to end, and then had to restart the entire piece. So visualizing where it is, I often will like write it out imaginary before I go in, and that allows me to center my word and make sure that it will all fit in one space. So we've just written regular handwriting, nothing fancy, doesn't matter if it looks beautiful or ordinary, just regular. If you can do a little fancy loops, that will help for the dramatics later on. Okay, and I'm gonna just leave the T's to the end because that's a really fun part that I often will leave to the end of a piece. So right now we just have handwriting. It's very thin. It's spaced out enough between letters that we can go back in to do our second step, which as we mentioned before is thickening up downstrokes while keeping any upstrokes quite thin. We probably won't even need to change it unless we've wobbled a little bit, which will happen, especially if you're like doing it first thing in the morning, you haven't had breakfast, maybe you've had some coffee, your hand might be a little bit shaky. The really nice thing about chalk paint is that with a simple wet paper towel, you can just go back in and erase it, and you won't notice. So that's a really good thing to remember about this medium as well. So any downstrokes that I would have written, I want to make sure that those are thicker. And by focusing on the downstrokes, it's going to be consistent. Sometimes if you overthink it and you see spaces that you can kind of like thicken lines, and it's not consistent with upstrokes or downstrokes, it's going to look a little bit off. It'll probably still look nice, but it won't look like calligraphy. So if you can't remember which you did with downstrokes, you can kind of go over it again. If your hand's sweaty like mine, it's going to maybe wipe some of your letters, so just be aware of that. But we can fix that as we go. So if you can see that in the E, should bring it a little bit closer. We are working on just this downstroke here. And we're gonna color that in. So you can actually even block it all out first if you want to, and then color it in first. So we can do that just to demonstrate. I'm gonna fix this a little bit. Okay, so we've blocked out those downstrokes, and then now we can color them in, and then that will give us a little look of calligraphy. You can also do this with actual chalk, and you're going to want to watch for that same thing as with the chalk pen, is that whatever is below, it's going to smudge. So potentially it's good to do the words one by one so that you can be really free with your hand and you don't have to be super conscious of these other things down here. I find that you can find these boards a lot of different places. This is actually like as funny as it is, we're doing faux calligraphy. I think this is a faux chalkboard. So you can find these, as I mentioned, at Michael's, but they also have tons at Dollarama these days, both real and kind of a fake chalkboard, which works great for these pens. So now we're going to work on the second letter here. So any downstroke, I'm going to thicken up. I'm going to kind of fix my smudge lines. Now this Y is super fun. I'm going to zoom in for this one. These like big swooping letters are kind of the ones that make the end result look really nice and whimsical and fancy. So I kind of like to put a little extra emphasis on them by making these long lines in the Y. You can even loop it around however you want. It makes it super fun. Cassandra, hello. Okay, so downstroke. Nice and thick, but as soon as we're gonna be going up, we're gonna stop because that's gonna provide that aesthetic that we want. Same within this loop, we're going to do the downstroke and then we're gonna leave it. And that's gonna provide contrast between the thick and the thin lines that will look really beautiful, will look like calligraphy. So I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna draw, or I'm gonna color it in. Great sound. That's a satisfying sound on this. This is a little bit hard to do with one hand. Over to there. It's okay to thicken up a little bit the thin lines if you want to add a little emphasis, but you want to make sure that the contrast is still there. Okay. So for this one, it's correct because the downstrokes are thicker, but I'm finding that they're so much thicker than the thin lines that it looks a little bit unnatural. So in this situation, I would just go lightly on top of those thinner lines just to kind of make them a little more consistent, but still providing that contrast. Until I'm happy with it, feel free to, when you're doing this, just test it out a little bit. Okay, that's a little better for the lighting. Okay. Speaking of poets, are there any poets or writers that anyone here loves? I would love to hear more and discover more. So if you have a favorite, toss it in the comments. This S is a little bit fancy. Some of them get really tricky because they're quite windy, so you really just pay attention to, as soon as your pen's going upwards, you're gonna stop, but it's helpful to kind of smooth it in so that it is a natural change in the thickness of the letter. The other thing is that when you're doing loops such as the O or the R, it's helpful to thicken the line from the inside, not from the outside. And this will also create a more natural look. Whereas the R, you can do that from the outside. Okay, so what we have here, oh yes, James, Pablo Neruda. I have been following this writer online, and the postings that I'm seeing are just beautiful. I saw one today that was amazing. Thank you for that reminder. So we have kind of our base, most important part of our board, which is the handwriting with the going in and doing that second step of thickening up the downward strokes. So now we have the really fun part. Now all the stress is gone because it all fits in there. And you can read hopefully what it says. So now we get to do the really fun decorative component of this, which is the T's. I love when there's tons of T's in different pieces. I can show you this one again. It's pretty fun to, actually I'm gonna get my paper up here. It's pretty fun to do different sort of dotting of the I's and crossing of the T's throughout a piece. So I'm going to show you a couple examples. And definitely it's important when you're learning to just have a sketch page and work through that. So I have a T. I can do this sort of like fancy wave over top the T, or I can do the opposite, which means starting by looping upwards and then downwards. Or I can do a straight across T, which looks really nice in some pieces. You can even kind of spin it around, spiral it up, however you like. Yeah, maybe you want to start really low and come right around, and then maybe you would build that into your next letter. Experiment with it. There's also tons of fonts online that you can look at for inspiration. But I find that people will generally kind of gravitate to one style. So if you're going to be hand lettering a lot, it's good to be consistent in however you do your letters, because it is in a way your own font. It's your handwriting. You can take tips and tricks from different things, like learning about the brush strokes and learning about great ways to format certain letters, but it's your font. So no one can do it exactly the same as you. That's a really special thing. So yeah, discover what you love and then continue to do that. And if you keep doing it, maybe it'll be recognizable as that's your handwriting. Someone I think of with that one is Cal Barteski, who's a Winnipeg artist. And you can see her hand lettering or her brush script anywhere that you go. And you know that it's her because she is so consistent with her style, and her style is very natural and her own handwriting. Another really amazing calligrapher who's a friend of mine is Jennifer Bianca, and she does really incredible both handwritten calligraphy, like classical calligraphy, brush script, and then she also does digital font creation. So check both of those artists out for inspiration with hand lettering, and to see that when you really like embrace this art form, it can become really beautiful, can make a huge impact, and also is very recognizable when you create your own style of hand lettering. So we're going to do these fun teas, and then we can do a little bit of decorations around. I'm just checking my battery because that's always a thing. Can't see it right now, but we will hope for the best. So for this one, I'm gonna keep the T's the same because it's only one word that has those T's, and so I want it to be a little bit cohesive and consistent, but I'm gonna apply the same technique to these, the crossing of the T's as I would to the letters, which means that any downward stroke I'm gonna make a little bit thicker. Horizontal I'm gonna leave as is, upward strokes leave as is, downward stroke a little bit thicker. Okay, so we have our letters, and now we're gonna do some fun greenery around. So on a very large, wide chalkboard, I might go around after I've written and do a wreath of chalk leaves. In this kind of shape that you're working with, there's a couple different options that are nice. You can create an image down here, say a couple flowers and leaves if you want, or you could focus on corners. Let's see if I have an example on the other side. This is something that I've used for markets before. So this is an example of something that I used for an outdoor market that I created. And in this, I just actually worked with negative space. I didn't do it super centered in any way, but I wrote these things out first. And then any negative space that I could see, I did some little greenery leaves. If you actually look closely, you can see that I've applied the same downward thick stroke to the leaves as I did to the letters, which made them look a little bit calligraphy-esque, as you can see. And I also used a contrasting font from my artist, my market name. And so this also provides interest for the eye, I find, when you use a little bit different fonts. However, using a consistent font is also very beautiful and quite classic. You see a lot of that at weddings. So to do something a little bit different, I think we're going to just focus on a feature flower underneath. We have a lot of negative space. We could technically do it up here as well, or focusing on the corners. So down here, what sort of flower should we do? I think we're going to do just a simple rose, maybe 2 roses with some greenery and foliage around. So I want to make sure that my flower is going to be centered. If you picture like, if you're working with images on, like, I use Canva all the time, it's really nice because it actually centers things for you and shows you the line that's directly down the middle. In working, not digitally, you have to do that with your own brain. So just sometimes taking a step back, looking at it from afar, seeing that you have some little errors and you can fix them. It helps to get that perspective, and then you can kind of space out where you're wanting to do your decorative component of the piece. So I'm going to start by just doing a little rose. Which is the same way that I would paint, is the same way that I'm doing using with a chalk marker. And I'm gonna apply that downstroke thicker lines as well, because I think that looks really nice with the contrast of the white chalk on the blackboard. Another little rose here. And then I'm going to do some nice leaves and apply the same technique. So it gets quite repetitive, as you can see, but that's what kind of brings that little mindfulness piece. Another super important thing with any type of art that you're doing is you want to be really gentle with yourself, kind with yourself. Know that you're learning, and it's okay to make imperfect pieces of art, and it's okay to learn from your mistakes, like anything. Really, you can fill in whatever space you want with your drawings. It can be anything that you want. Be yourself, do things that you love. I love little berries. Also find that when you're doing like a really simple piece of writing, it's nice to be a little more detailed with whatever you're decorating your brush script with. In painting, it's really fun to, as I showed you in the first piece that we worked with, I actually wrote it out and then splattered it with some metallic paint to add a little something to a really simple quote that I had scripted. So that's it. It's super simple, as we discussed before. 2 steps. The first step, handwriting things out in your regular handwriting, leaving space for going back and adding details. Second step, any brush stroke that you have facing downwards, you're going to thicken, and you're going to leave the upward strokes the same width that you originally wrote them in or painted them in, but you're going to want to make sure to smooth out those contrasts in the strokes. And then you can have a beautiful faux calligraphy hand lettered piece of art or sign, anything that you need for your events or for your walls or for even Mother's Day cards, which is coming up quite soon. So yeah, I hope that this was helpful. It's definitely the very basic level of starting to do different kind of brush lettering or hand lettering or brush stroke, anything along those lines. So take this, play around with it, experiment, create writing that you really don't like, find some things that you do like, and come up with your own style. And then you can apply it in so many different places in your life and in your creations. So thank you so much for joining us. We have a full lineup for the next 4 days at 3:30 of amazing artists on our staff team, as well as submissions from artists in our community. So make sure to tune in at 3:30 every day. Thanks so much for joining. See you later.